Yes, Accordion Cool. Coach Dave here. Some people started calling me Accordion Dave. A couple people call me that. I don't know why, but I don't care. Just don't call me late for lunch or however that saying goes. Well, no real theme today. Now, that first tune is called C Jam Blues. Why is it called C Jam Blues? Because it's written in the key of C. Now, when Corey Pesatoro sits right over here beside me, well, Corey Pesatoro does C Jam Blues in the key of B flat. Well, all the guys I play with do that. Well, okay, Corey, we do it in B flat. And the thing about that tune, there's only two notes, two written notes, and everything else, you just got to let it fly and, like they say, throw it against the wall and see if anything sticks. And it was written in 1942 by the great Duke Ellington. Duke Ellington, my favorite big band orchestra, whatever you want to call it. All right, well, we're moving on. And this particular tune was written by a fellow named Henry Mancini. Remember him? Yeah. Wrote this in 1961, and it was the theme song for a movie. Movie was called Breakfast at Tiffany's. Song is called Moon River. Now, I have no idea what Moon River, or if there even is a Moon River, had to do with Breakfast at Tiffany's. But big hit. Movie was a hit. Everybody made a lot of money, so Little Moon River. Let's see what it sounds like. Now, you may have noticed something a little different about that. Moon River was written as a pretty waltz. Well, you know, Coach Dave doesn't play any waltzes. I mean, you know, they're nice, but they're just too dainty. You can't, you know, mess around with them. So that was in 4/4 time. And I was on a gig a few years back, and I asked the lady who worked in the place, you know, what's your favorite tune? She says, oh, I love Moon River. I says, well, you might not like it the way I play it. She says, oh, no, I'll love it any way you play it. So I did, and she did, and everybody was happy. So that's the end of that story. Now, this next tune, written by a fellow named Willie Nelson. You may have heard of him. He wrote it, and in 1961... young lady named Patsy Cline had the biggest hit of her career on this particular tune. Now, there is a story that I heard, and I'm not sure if it's true or not, but Willie Nelson happened to be in a place in Nashville, shall we say, where they serve alcoholic beverages, and he ran into Patsy Cline's husband and says, here, you know, let her listen to this tune. I'd like to have her recorded. Well, the story goes, whether it's true or not, she hated it. Cool heads prevailed, obviously, and she recorded it. Now, there's a wonderful country music museum in Nashville. And you walk in, and there's a whole room for Patsy Cline, and as you walk through the door, you hear this song. Crazy. I think that is the best country tune ever written, and of course, Willie Nelson. How much better can you get than that? Of course, when Patsy Cline had that big hit in 1961, I believe it was about a year later that she was tragically killed in a plane crash. So I guess that's the song that she went out with, but she had a big, big hit. Well, this next tune is kind of like the exact opposite of something like Crazy. It's called The Lady is a Tramp. Oh my goodness. And it was written by my favorite songwriting duo, Rodgers and Hart. Rodgers and Hart. And it was written, I think, around 1937 for a show called Babes in Arms. Well, never heard of the show, but obviously another one of those great tunes that, you know, the show dies, but the tunes didn't. And this was a big tune. Of course, Frank Sinatra recorded, but, you know, Frank was just so cool. He called it The Chick is a Tramp. I mean, is that cool or what? Well, not really, no. But, you know, Frank tried to be cool, but he just couldn't pull it off. So let's do a Little Lady, the one that's a tramp, and see what happens. old lady, she's just a tramp. Well, what can I say? Well, this next tune, push the right button here. We got it, all right. It was written way back around 1950, I believe. And it kind of kicked around. It was actually, I think it was in Portuguese or Spanish. It wasn't even really in the States at that time. A fellow named Perez Prado. Perez Prado was a trumpet player, had his own band. He recorded this song and had the biggest hit. And you will recognize it as soon as I play it. Now he took, I can't do it on the accordion, but he took his trumpet and the first note, did one of those things. And I can't do it, but you'll remember as I play Cherry Pink and Apple Blossom White. Cherry Pink and Apple Blossom White. Yeah. Well, we're getting down towards the end of our time today, to our last tune. Now, this tune was written in 1925 by a fellow named Ben Burney. Who, Coach Dave? Ben Burney actually had a big band back then, and he wrote this tune. Now, this tune makes you decide whether you're a basketball fan or a music fan, because this particular tune, the Harlem Globetrotters did their warm-ups and still do to this tune. So, Sweet Georgia Brown. Georgia Brown, or the Globetrotters theme song. Take your pick, take your pick. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little dealer's choice here today, kind of a dealer's choice, so no real thing. And as usual, want to thank you all for watching, listening, tuning in. However you see or hear this little extravaganza, it's, I guess, radio, TV, interweb, I don't know. I guess I'm all over the place, and I certainly appreciate that. And, of course, you know what well, two things I'm going to say. The first thing is, bring the young'uns in, bring the young'uns in. Hear these songs. They're not exposed to these songs nowadays, except for that last one. If they're basketball fans, they might recognize it. And of course, last but certainly not least, the big guy behind the glass, Austin Ricketts. And last week we had a little problem. I couldn't get any sound. Well, I use a wireless connectors. And, oh yeah, you got to turn those things on. So today, when we're setting up, Austin reminded me. I told him yes, I had done it. But anyway, let's go home with a little more of, I don't know. How about Sweet Georgia Brown? That's a good one.